everyone. Oh, sorry, recording in progress. Good evening. Welcome to the 16th meeting of the Pricing Options for Equitable Mobility Task Force. Thank you so much for joining us. Again, we know it's suddenly a wonderful summer evening, so thank you for spending it with us for just the second to the last time. I guess if we want to go ahead and switch to the next slide. Zoom guidelines. You should all be pretty familiar with this by now, but just a quick reminder, mute for the general guidelines for task force members. Please mute when you're not speaking. Please hold your questions and comments for designated discussion times and use the raise your hand function when you'd like to speak. Found in now, I think both the participants and the reactions tab. And for any audience members who are here with us tonight, welcome. Thank you for joining us. We do ask that you keep yourself muted and your video off except during public comment opportunities, which will be coming up pretty shortly. So thanks again to everyone. And we will move on. And tonight, actually, before we get started, before we even jump into the agenda, and for task force members, I know you know we're going to be spending the bulk of our meeting really talking through our draft recommendations tonight. We're really excited to dig in with you. But we're also really excited tonight to welcome opening remarks from Commissioner Hardesty as well as Commissioner Rubio. And as you all know, this project is a joint project from the Portland Bureau of Transportation as well as the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. So again, since you all have been doing such tremendous work with us, really over the last 18 months, through a pretty crazy 18 months, or at least, you know, a little more than a year. We really wanted, as we wrap up this, as we wrap up this project, we wanted to invite the commissioners in charge to just share a couple thoughts with you about your work and what they're looking forward to seeing. And Commissioner Rubio was actually not able to be with us tonight, but we have a recording that we'll show you in a minute. With her thoughts. And before that, I want to go ahead at this point and welcome Commissioner Hardesty, who is with us tonight. And thank you very much for attending. And Commissioner Hardesty, take it away.
Thank you so much, Shoshana, and thank you to each and every one of you. It is hard to believe that anybody got anything done in the last 16 months with like 4 simultaneous crises at one time, and holding down full-time jobs and taking care of family, and in some cases trying to teach and parent and mother and father and all of that, while still volunteering your time to help us think really strategically about this once in a generation opportunity that we have. And so first, just thank you, because I got to tell you, if I had a spouse, I'd have killed them during this pandemic and all the other crises. It's amazing my plants survived, right? I am fortunate I live by myself, so nobody's really mad at me too much. But I know this has been, I mean, this is something we've never experienced, right? As society, as a community. And it's up to us to actually come out of this pandemic with a better understanding of how inequalities play a role in our life every single day, whether we acknowledge it or not. They are there, they're systemic, and they are just, they're invisible to a lot of good people who are trying to do the right thing. So let me just say that the work you are doing is so paramount to the work that I want to do as the Commissioner of Transportation. Because, you know, I got to tell you, when you are someone that believes climate change is real, and when you're someone that believes that we have to get people out of automobiles and reduce fossil fuel usage, and then you inherit a bureau that is actually over reliant on fossil fuel taxes and parking garage fees, and you know, it's like, I can't do that. I can't say one thing and do something else in my day-to-day world. And so that's a priority for me here at PBOT, is to make sure that when we speak, we are speaking about the climate emergency that we're in and what we're doing as a city to actually shift from where we are now to where we want to be in the future. And I've been pretty clear I don't have any interest in continuing to expand highways so that for the next 50 years, we're only expanding highways and patching up highways. If we don't take the opportunity now to really think about how do we live a green transit existence and how do we start building it now? If we can't do it with the new administration, with the new guy at the transit administration at the federal level, with our own congressional if we can't do it in this moment, we will never, ever, ever actually walk our talk. And so, I'm not about going back to normal. Normal will never be normal again. And we have to start pushing ourselves to think about what does the future look like? And what do we do right now to make sure that every dollar we spend, we're investing in what we want for the future, not reinforcing the bad stuff from the past. So let me just say, I just can't wait for you to finish your work. As you know, one of my priorities is really creating walkable communities where we don't need automobiles to hang out with your neighbors and to have a meal. And how do you make sure that just because you live in East Portland doesn't mean you are less worthy of actually having a walking neighborhood where you don't take your life into your hands when you're just trying to cross the street? Um, PBOT has been really visionary when it comes to keeping small businesses in business during the pandemic. And I was so grateful to know how creative my bureau was and didn't charge a dime, right? It was about what do we do to help small businesses stay in business, right? Luckily, my colleagues remembered that we didn't charge a dime and actually gave us some resources to continue to expand that program. It is one of the most successful COVID responsive programs at the city of Portland. And I got to tell you, I can talk to people on the far left and the far right, and everybody raves about that program. But I'm also talking about what else do we do now that we've got a commitment to change 82nd Avenue. If we're not putting high speed bus on 82nd Avenue, we are once again missing the opportunity to be thinking about the future and not what we did in the past, right? And so the work you've done over the last 18 months is really critical for me as I continue to tell my colleagues that I'm thinking in the future. I ordered the first electric fire truck that we are going to test out. And we are first in line to get the first ones that roll off the assembly line because I'm not interested in actually pulling those big gas guzzling fire trucks out, which are primarily on medical calls, right? So we can't just say we're green and we believe that we're in a climate emergency. Every penny we spend has to point towards where we're moving. And so your work over these last 18 months was not for naught. It is going to be critical to help me be able to sell to my colleagues this vision of where we're moving, right? What we know is where we were going wasn't working. And it wasn't working for the planet. Wasn't working for Black, Indigenous, and other communities of color. What we know is that racism is embedded in every system that we have. And if we don't go into this new reimagining who we are and where we're headed, if we don't go into this with our eyes wide open and not just pretending that the last 16 months didn't happen, right? This is not an episode of Dynasty. We're not going to wake up and it all went away. This is real. But what a great opportunity we have to actually be the leaders that we are, right? And there's nothing about like being brave to do things differently. That's why we have the Portland Clean Energy Fund. I can't tell you how many people told me I was out of my mind when I start taking that out and selling it to the community. And guess what? It is the only one like it in the country, right? That's who we are. And when we just stop telling ourselves all the reasons why we can't do what we know is the right thing, we do phenomenal stuff. So help me be visionary. Help me get my colleagues to see where we're moving as compared to where we've been. Because where we've been is yesterday, right? Where we're going is what we're building for our kids and our grandkids. And they are going to judge us on the decisions, the big decisions we make right now. And so I hope you take a little rest when your work is over, but then I hope you could show up at City Hall and put pressure on my colleagues to actually believe like I believe that we actually have the opportunity right now to think, do, and act differently. And guess what? If we think, do, and act differently, we will get more just, more equitable, and more transparent outcomes. And we will be a much better city because of it. So thank you for inviting me. I am going to hang around for as long as I can because I want to see you in action, especially now that you're talking about what you're going to be telling us at City Council. So there were two questions that I hope I answered that you sent me in advance. How urgent does the commissioner feel it is to implement the task force recommendations? I think I've made my case for why I need them yesterday, right? Not today, but yesterday. And then the second question, how will the commissioner help ensure the recommendations from the task force do not sit on the shelf? Well, I don't know about you. I'm going to sell them every place I go, every neighborhood association, every business meeting, every speech I give, because what I'm trying to get Portlanders to see is we have this unique, once in a generation opportunity to be bold, to be visionary, and to keep our eyes on the future that we want to build. And I want to build a future that's more equitable, more fair, and more transparent, and where all Portlanders can thrive. And I don't want your zip code to determine where you live. So we got some work to do, but you guys have put your foot to the metal. I know you're going to give us some great recommendations, but I can tell you to do anything at City Hall, guess what? It takes 3 votes, right? And I've been surprised of late how hard it is to get that third vote for good things and vision. But I have no doubt that I can get it. I will do all I can. I know Commissioner Rubio will do all she can. But guess what? Our voices are really not as important as yours because you are the people who volunteered your time, have looked at the data, have made some recommendations. Your voices are going to matter. If city council is to adopt this, I will do my part, but I'm still going to need you. So take a quick break and then come back and help me make these things happen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Hardesty. Super inspirational, and we really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right, I think now we have Commissioner Rubio. There we go. And then thank you, Commissioner Hardesty. We're also thrilled that you'll stick around and listen as we get into some of the recommendations. But here is Commissioner Rubio.
All right, and I'm going to look to you, Shoshana, for the thumbs up if the volume is working when I hit play.
Hello, POEM Task Force members. Thank you for the opportunity to address you all this evening virtually. I'm out of town right now, and I regret that this didn't allow me to attend in person, but I wanted to be sure to convey how much I look forward to engaging with you as your recommendations are presented to City Council this fall. In my first 6 months on City Council and serving as the commissioner in charge for the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, I really enjoyed learning about your efforts and also following your conversations to date. And I've been very impressed by your thoughtful deliberations. Almost a year ago exactly, the city declared a climate emergency. And as a bureau leading climate efforts for the city, I know this is a critical conversation for BPS to be supporting. Curbing rising transportation emissions is critical to meeting our climate goals. Doing that means taking urgent headway on several interrelated fronts. First, we have to reduce internal combustion engine driving and support more efficient ways for people to move around and provide convenient, reliable, and affordable options for our community members reliant on non-auto forms of transportation. We also have to move more towards electrifying the car trips that remain on our roads, knowing people, especially those that have been displaced to outer Portland neighborhoods, still need to drive to meet their own needs. Low carbon auto options should not be available only for the wealthy. In fact, they are now becoming more affordable and more available. Also, advocating for the state to continue taking action. I'm really happy to learn that the Oregon legislature just passed a bill that will double the amount of state rebates available for income qualified people to purchase or lease a new or used EV. $5,000 rebates are now available for income qualified households, which is an increase from the previous $2,500 maximum amount. And then finally, we need to plan and build connected, complete, and inclusive neighborhoods so that everyone in Portland has access to their essential services within 20 minutes from their home. And as in all of our climate work, I'm committed to the city moving on these fronts in a way that improves outcomes for our Black, Indigenous, people of color community members, low-income households, and people with disabilities. It's not all about reducing emissions. It's also about achieving climate justice and addressing the disproportionate burdens these groups experience while averting climate catastrophe. I know these three prongs have come up a lot in your discussions today, and I'm really excited to see the specific recommendations you make to us and hear your thoughts on if and how pricing may support our broader demand management, electrification, and land use goals. Throughout my career, I've been dedicated to making local government more accessible and more responsive to all of our communities. And groups like this help reinforce the power of community and illustrates the dedicated, insightful, and innovative leaders that we do have in our community. It's inspiring and impressive to see a group of volunteers engage in such a nuanced, complex, and critical conversation. I'm so grateful to you all for your commitment to being a part of the policymaking process and for holding us all accountable to our values around equity, and also for taking on this urgent and important topic. I'm eager to play a role in moving your work forward and look forward to our continued work together. Thank you again for your great work and have a great meeting.
Wonderful. Well, man, inspiring note to start on. This was fabulous. Before we dive into the meat of the matter, folks, I have a little fun bit of housekeeping that I hope I gave you enough forewarning on in our emails over the last couple of days. We are going to take a group photo because we have no photos of us in our virtual meeting space, which we've been in for over a year now. So if you'll indulge me and turn your camera on, I'm going to take just a couple quick screenshots just so that we can memorialize this occasion. And it's great to have you with us in this photo, Commissioner Hardesty. So thank you. Okay.
Do we need
Commissioner Rubio is going to be jealous, but.
Shoshana, what were you saying?
I was just, do we need to take two? Are there people on the second?
I will take one for each panel. So I'll count you down 1, 2, 3, and then I'm going to switch screens and take another one. So put your best cheese on and we'll do 1, 2, 3. And one more. Oh, gotta find the screenshot again. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Great. Thank you, everyone. That was fun. Now in our final report, when we say we met virtually for 18 months, we'll actually have some proof. All right, let me get my slide deck back up here and we will kick off with all the good stuff. All right, get your video panel back up. Okay, can you see the agenda on the screen? Okay, wonderful. All right, so here's the game plan for tonight. As Shoshana said, this is our penultimate meeting and it's a big one. It's going to be chock full of a lot of great discussion and we are so excited to be here. We'll do a little bit of housekeeping for the next few minutes, just kind of our normal adopting our previous meeting summaries, seeing if there's any public comment here this evening, and Shoshana will give a brief kind of update on where we're headed next with the project, and then we're diving into it. So I will share out, again, the link to our latest draft recommendations, and I also encourage you to pull that up from your email earlier today. We're going to be kind of walking section by section and pulling out a few good meaty topics for discussion. And our goal is that by the end of this meeting, we've kind of had our final deliberation and you feel ready to cast your vote in our next meeting in July. Before we go further, any edits needed to meeting number 14 or number 15, those summaries, before we call those good for the record? I'll see if I can pull my participants tab back up. Not seeing any hands jump up. So we'll call that order of business done, and those will be confirmed for the record. And then do we have anyone here tonight that would like to provide brief public comment? I'll wait a second to see if any hands jump up from our observers, and welcome to everyone who is joining us tonight and observing the discussion. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands and we did not receive any written comments. For those who are here tonight, if you hear something that you'd like to make a comment about, feel free to send an email to us at that email address and we will get it out to the task force. And now I'm going to hand it over to Shoshana to do the brief project update for us.
All right, you guys are all making me hungry looking at the chat, talking about meeting snacks that you miss. I agree, never knew we'd miss meeting snacks so much. So just a couple quick sort of updates before we get into the deliberation. So as we know, as we've said, we are in the home stretch here. Final deliberation tonight on the recommendations. You all saw the recommendations. Thank you so much. Many of you sent back some additional edits and suggestions, which we have incorporated, and you should hopefully have seen the revised version, which went out again at the end of last week, and which we will be talking through tonight. I just lost, and so then in July, hopefully we'll do most of the talking and figuring things out tonight. And then we do expect that probably because of this discussion, there'll be some final edits, which we will incorporate after the meeting. And then we'll send you out what will hopefully be the final version, or very, very close to final version, after tonight's meeting or a few weeks before the July meeting. So you have plenty of time to look it over. And one note about the July meeting, we do need everyone present for your vote to count. And I know we're getting further and further into summer and there's lots of things going on. We're hoping, if at all possible, folks are able to join us in the July meeting. And if not, if you could let us know ahead of time, we do want to, even if you're not for some reason able to sort of be there for that final vote, we do want to make sure that we're able to record your feedback in other ways. We think we will be able to sort of write extra things in the final report and things like that. So let us know if you're not able to come, but we really hope you are able to come in July. And then the July meeting, hopefully, if we work most of it out tonight, the July meeting and the vote is pretty quick. We can have a little bit more discussion about some implementation next steps and how we can all help continue to move this along. As Commissioner Hardesty said, we're gonna need to sort of continue to engage with City Council and continue to work together to get these things done. So a little more discussion about that, and then a little bit of a celebration and a thank you. And we are not able to have meeting pizza or meeting sandwiches because of this, but we're still trying to think about something that we can do to make the last meeting a little bit special. So stay tuned for that. And then we do, so after the July meeting, that will be end of this phase of the project and our time together like this, at least in 2-hour chunks on Monday evenings. But then we are hoping to bring this to City Council in September. And we will be bringing the recommendations as you all vote on them sort of in their entirety to City Council. In addition, some of the things that staff will do between July and then is try to figure out what are some tangible next steps so that when we go to City Council, it is the recommendations from you all along with a little bit more, okay, here are some things we could do to actually get them going. So there will probably be 2 parts to this presentation when it goes to City Council. And one of the other things is we will be probably sending out an email pretty soon. We'd like to start sort of talking to you about if folks would like to join us at that City Council date. If you'd like to provide some quotes as we're putting together the final materials and the final recommendations and things like that. So we will be in touch. There's a little bit more that we're hoping you'll come along with us on for this project, but we are very, very close. That's it for this slide. And so now we want to really jump in and talk about the actual recommendations. Yeah. So really quickly, and Emma and I are going to tag team a little bit tonight. What we did, how we collected feedback. You all saw, again, about a couple weeks ago, we sent out 1 round of the recommendations. We got a bunch of feedback from you all. Again, thanks so much. And what we did at that point, there were some that were pretty simple grammatical edits or very sort of simple language changes just to make things, to clarify things, make it easier to understand. So we took all of those. And then there was sort of a next round of feedback, which we also thought was pretty straightforward, was pretty much in line with the things that we've discussed together as a group. In some cases, we had multiple people suggesting a similar change, or again, it just seemed to match pretty well with what we've been discussing. So we made a number of those changes and we put them in track changes, and they were in the version that we sent out to you at the end of last week. Then and we will show those to you tonight. We're going to go over them. We are hoping to go over them pretty quickly, so that we can save time to discuss the ones that are really, we think there are some more things to talk about. So in that third category, we flagged, either in some cases we got differing opinions from task force members. Someone said to do something and someone said sort of do the opposite. So we need to talk about that. Or just some suggestions that it wasn't quite as, they felt more substantive that we would want to discuss as a group before just making them. So those are the things that we're hoping to spend most of our time on tonight, and see where we are. And with that, I will turn it back over to Emma, who's going to talk a little bit more about the actual process for doing that.
Yes, thank you, Shoshana. Our game plan for tonight. So we're going to go section by section, and I did put the link to those draft recommendations with all the markups in the chat, so you can use that as your guide as we go through this. So in each section, Shoshana is going to give the kind of quick recap of the more straightforward stuff we incorporated, and we'll ask if there's any kind of fatal flaw concerns anyone wants to flag. But then we're going to zoom in on the pieces that you see called out in those green boxes, those points of disagreement or something kind of brand new. And we'll spend the bulk of our time there for discussion. And I do want to, flag that per our charter, while we're all a lovely group of people who I think really love to agree, consensus is not required. So there's not like a intent tonight to convince everyone to be on the same page. You're a great group of diverse individuals with diverse perspectives, and we recognize that. And so we, with your permission as facilitator, I am going to try to keep us moving. And even if we end in a point of disagreement, that's okay. In our next meeting, we'll have a chance to vote on that. And as our charter says, all minority opinions will be recorded for the record. So just a few notes of kind of how today will go. I really do encourage you to follow along so that you can kind of see what we're talking about as we go through, and I'll try to give you page number cues. In terms of the chat and our reactions function tonight, you'll see that the questions we're posing are really kind of, does anyone disagree or does anyone have any concerns about this? And the reason for that is if we waited for everyone to chime in and say, I agree, we'd be here for 20 hours. So we do encourage you to use the reactions to show agreement. And I'll try to kind of cue that, before we move forward. Is everyone comfortable moving forward? And the reactions that you can usually find at the bottom of your screen. But we'll use the hand raise function, for folks who want to provide comments and responses to that question of, do you have any concerns or do you disagree? This one's just kind of a quick suggestion to try to avoid wordsmithing. We're 19 individuals who say things all a little bit different. We totally get that. I'm sure you could write a lot of these better than we did, but we want to prioritize our discussion tonight on really the substantive content. And then as Shoshana mentioned, we're going to vote next month. I want to share that the plan is not to vote on every single bullet as a standalone. The plan is to vote on the nearer term and the longer term recommendations one by one, because we do understand there could be some differing opinions. But the principles, the complementary strategies, and the implementation next steps, we plan to vote on those as a block, so all those bullets together. We may revise that based on how tonight goes, but I wanted to kind of give you that preface or look ahead at what it's going to be like in July, what we think it's going to be like in July. And then just really quickly, you guys are the most respectful, wonderful group, so this can be super fast. But as a reminder, our working agreement and our charter, we ask that we be respectful and courteous. We listen to understand, not to respond. Let's share the air. I will do my best as your facilitator to prioritize folks who haven't spoken and let them get a chance to speak first before we hear from the same folks. We always want to assume good intentions, but do attend to the impact of our words if they have impacted someone. Let's direct passion towards the issues and not towards each other. And then again, with your permission, I'll try to keep us on time tonight, because one of our ground rules is to get you out on time, and we're really committed to that. All right, and I guess the last thing I'll say is tonight's going to be a bit of a dense discussion. There's a lot of content. These are kind of wordy slides. I apologize. We really appreciate your attention. If by some miracle we're making good time, I'll give you a stretch break in the middle because I'm a nice person. But thank you so much in advance for your attention over the last 18 months and in this kind of big, heavy meeting. All right, and I think with that, oh, the last thing is I wanted to just acknowledge we sent out some optional review exercises with the recommendations. And one of those, this might be a familiar graphic to you. And over the course of our project together, we've talked a lot about the system impacts of different pricing things, what happens to VMT, what happens to climate, et cetera, et cetera. But at the end of the day, equitable mobility means putting people first. And so tonight, as if you're sitting there wrestling with a question or you're trying to figure out whether you agree or whether you don't, I just encourage you to kind of come back to this frame of what might this recommendation mean for an individual household in Portland or an individual business owner in Portland, and use that very human-centric frame to really guide our work. I think you guys have all done that throughout, but if this is helpful, this is in one of your homework packets. You can dig it out and have that up for you as well. Okay, Shoshana, I think I'm handing it over to you to kick us off.
All right, diving in. So as Emma said, we have a lot of slides with a lot of words tonight, and we're going to stay all together. I know we've been doing a lot of group work, but we just feel like we have to go over this together at this point. So to begin with, there's just a few things we wanted to call out that we received sort of in emails back from people, not necessarily in a particular section, but some overarching high level feedback and some edits that we shared. So one of the first one was to make some of the recommendations more action oriented. We had a few places where it was develop a proposal, and we got some feedback, just do it. So we edited in a few different places to really focus and move towards implementation and action, knowing that there is, of course, still some work we're going to have to do, but still hearing you that the recommendation is to implement. Overarching feedback of emphasizing the need for city leadership in this space. And we strengthened some statements, particularly in the last section around the implementation next step section based on that feedback. And then also some feedback around recognizing the potential business implications. So we tried in a few places to do this, to call out the cost to the economy in the foundational statements and in the principles a little bit more strongly. And we added a reference to evaluating business impacts again in the implementation next step section. So those were just a few of the things that we did based on that overarching feedback. And I might go through this one, and then we have some other overarching or some other feedback I'll do on foundations and principles, and then pause for questions on all of that, if that makes sense, I think. So moving to the next, I think this next one is our wordiest slide. But again, this is the summary of the edits that we think all sort of made sense and hopefully don't need that much discussion, but let us know if you disagree. In the foundational statement section of the recommendations, one of the recommendations was just to collapse the foundational statements to fewer bullets, make it a little bit more logical. So we did that. Suggestions to improve connections to the equitable mobility framework categories and be also more explicit about status quo challenges. And we added some language in both of those areas to try to do that. We added a new foundational statement about auto dependence. We've talked a lot over the course of the task force about how while we are trying to reduce transportation demand, there are all sorts of reasons that people need to drive. And that is important to acknowledge and important to accommodate in many cases, depending on the situation. So we added that into the foundational statement, as well as some language around recognizing the volume of short trips. And there may be an opportunity to reduce some car reliance. There was also a suggestion we reference in a number of places connected communities, and a great suggestion to make sure that that's not just connected communities, but connected, inclusive, and complete communities. So we changed that language. Then, so those were all in the foundational statements. Then in the principles section, again, the overarching principles for pricing for equitable mobility, we had a suggestion to further emphasize demand management as the priority goal and really connect this to equitable mobility outcomes. Some specific language suggestions that showed up in a new bullet in the design guidelines, which you'll see for those of you who are following along. Also a suggestion to use the equitable mobility framework to evaluate current and future policies. And I think the way the language was written before, it was to evaluate future pricing policies. And a great suggestion to make sure that this is a framework that can be used a little bit more broadly in PBOT to evaluate policies, which we have actually talked about. And hopefully you'll all be pleased to know we are sharing it with a number of colleagues and trying to use that already in other work. There was a suggestion to move the revenue design guidelines down the list. Since we say that the raising revenue shouldn't be the top priority as compared to demand management, then it didn't, folks thought we should not sort of move right into talking about it. Again, a suggestion to call out auto access for those who need it and multimodal financial incentives, and we did that. Also a suggestion to remove transit-oriented development to avoid conflating it with affordable housing. And so we changed language that said affordable housing and transit-oriented development to be more specific to affordable housing near transportation options. So it's really speaking to the need for affordable housing near transportation options, not all transit-oriented development necessarily. And then a final suggestion, or I think a couple suggestions for some more details in the technology and enforcement sections. And one of the specific additions was around making sure that any pricing infrastructure itself doesn't further add burdens to our communities. So that was a mouthful, a lot of words. I want to pause for a second and see if there's any of those that folks want more information on or want to talk about before we get into a couple that we do definitely think need a little bit more discussion. I don't think I'm seeing any hands. Are you seeing any?
I'm not seeing any hands. So I think we will move then into the ones that we've called out on the PDF in green for some more discussion with the group. Okay, so the first one of those is around variable rate design. So we received some feedback and concern about the original language in this section that said that variable rates should be considered for their potential impact on climate and equity outcomes. And then we received another comment or concern that talking about EV discounts might discourage mode shifting away from driving and reduction in VMT. And so what you're going to see tonight is we're going to kind of summarize the feedback where relevant, give you just a few kind of staff notes what we considered when we processed that feedback, and then look at the latest proposed recommendation language. So from the staff perspective, as we considered these comments, we also went back to our discussion notes and we saw that a lot of folks in those small group discussions thought that variability could improve equitable mobility by providing some options for people and allowing a fee to be designed to achieve specific outcomes. And we also heard some folks say that there's a real importance to provide some EV discounts from a climate perspective and to support those who still need to drive. So, to both address the feedback we received, but also kind of acknowledge those notes that we found from the previous discussions, we did revise this sub-bullet a bit to be clearer that what we're saying is variable rate designs should be evaluated. And we also added just a little bit more detail to what variable might mean, what those kind of variables could be. So what our question is for the group tonight is does anyone disagree with keeping this statement, these design parameters in for that further consideration, and or disagree with how we've revised this statement to be about evaluation? So now it's a lot. I'm going to give you a second. And if you disagree or you want to offer any comments about questions or concerns with this language, please feel free to raise your hand now. All right, I see Sarah's hand, Elizabeth, and then Aaron. Sarah, go for it.
I would just, I mean, I don't think it's a problem. I would just say my concern is again about the slowness in the process. So I would, I don't know if it needs to be in here, but something just about making sure that that doesn't slow things down, but it is part of the evaluation and sort of quick fix implementation as things are rolled out, that they're constantly being evaluated for this rather than letting this slow things down.
Thanks, Sarah. Elizabeth, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, you all know that I'm a big advocate of electric vehicles in particular, and I thought a lot about this. And one of the things I just want to add is that you could have these things be intersectional, right? So that if you are already getting a discount in the pricing program for being low income or driving at an off time of day, then you could get an additional one for having a more fuel efficient vehicle. But that having a fuel efficient vehicle alone, it doesn't give you a discount if you don't meet any of the other criteria. So I think it's worth keeping in there. And I don't think that we should necessarily look at all of these as just sort of standalone options, but think about the ways that they could fit together.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thanks, Elizabeth. Aaron, go for it.
Yeah, I was saying on the EV, I understand how it can discourage mode shifting, and mode shifting would be the ultimate direction we'd want to encourage people to go. But it feels like it's the perfect being the enemy of the good a little bit, where any incentive to push people in that direction, I think, should be encouraged. We're moving in the right direction, helping incentivize people to, even if VMTs aren't reduced by as much, I'd rather have VMTs with EVs on the road than, lower VMTs, but it's all, gas guzzling vehicles, so it does feel like, yes, that's a consideration, but it's all just different variances of good.
Mm-hmm.
How I feel.
Mm-hmm. So thanks to you three, I've got kind of a proposal then to try to acknowledge those comments. One would be maybe adding a sub-bullet that could say something to Sarah's point of, evaluation should not delay implementation of urgent action. And then one to address kind of what Elizabeth and Aaron are both talking on either side about is maybe something that adds onto this bullet about that evaluation should consider the interrelationship between variables to best achieve climate and equity goals. So that it's looking at that, the trade-offs that you might see based on that design. I'm wondering maybe if I could see some emoji reactions or plus ones in the comments, or hands up if you disagree.
Emma, I just also want to acknowledge Commissioner Hardesty put a note in the chat, so just wanting to make sure you see that.
Thank you. And Commissioner Hardesty has written, I've pushed for exempting low-income folks at a certain percentage of MFI, medium family income. And I think that is very connected to our other principle, which we didn't call out here because everyone seemed to be in agreement about it, but about providing income or ensuring discounts, rebates, and exemptions are there.
If I may, I would just say that my experience says that low-income people don't benefit much from rebates or tax breaks at the end of the year. It works for folks who it works for, but people of color and especially low-income people of color, all the data shows that those dollars are left on the table. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I've been really pushing for an exemption, because we shouldn't cost burden low-income people when we push them out to the edges of the community and then charge them exorbitantly for the privilege of working their $15 an hour job. So.
Thank you, Commissioner.
You're welcome.
Sharif, I see your hand up. Go for it. You're on mute, Sharifa.
So are you asking us for feedback specifically on the latest proposed recommendation language? Like that specifically, or are you wanting us to discuss the feedback received?
I think a bit of both. I think to try to kind of focus our conversation, we sort of would love a specific response to where we have it, and if there's something we could do to it to address that feedback. But I welcome, your comments as well on the kind of general question on the table here around variability.
Well, I will be honest. I mean, I understand people's urgency to implement something quickly, but I feel like there needs to be more value. I mean, I agree with this. This includes evaluating how different variable rate designs. I feel like we're not there yet. I just don't. I just don't think we're there yet.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we've. It makes me nervous. I get nervous by it, and the idea of a variable pricing system is inherently inequitable, and people say that the status quo is inequitable, but we're all stuck in. At least not me. I take the bus, but anyone that drives is stuck in traffic together. That's, it sucks. It creates pollution, but that is equitable, more equitable than permitting people who are wealthy to just pass on through. I mean, basically, we have a problem in this country with wealth and virtue, and I just feel like variable pricing is designed to engineer behavior and basically is saying, you poor people are bad, are doing things wrong, and you wealthy people can go ahead and do what you've always been doing. It's not actually, and it's shown that the parts of town that have become more wealthy have also become more congested. These people drive more. Mm-hmm. And I just I'm not seeing it. I'm not feeling it. I mean, I think you guys all know, I had apprehensions about this from the get-go, but through the course of this 18 months, it's become like, really not digging it. Yeah. And that's just how I feel. I'm nervous about it. I feel like it could be a decision that's regretted. And that's where I'm at. Thank you.
I appreciate your comments, Sharif. I have one follow-up question, which is, completely hearing you on the burdening of low-income individuals in our community. Does the other principle in here, or would a system that ensured exemptions for low-income folks, but was still a variable rate system, would that alleviate any of your concerns? Or is
I think it does to a certain extent, but not really, because just being somebody that is, I mean, my income issues go up and down and everything like that. But there's been times when I've been really, really flat broke. And there's been times when, I'm on disability and stuff, and I have that, people have heard it, the benefits cliff. And it basically limits your choices in life. It limits your ability to be ambitious. And when we're talking about a basic just ability to drive down the street, that you've got to submit, I've talked about this before, submit your personal information, your life, and put it on the table. And, and you're already feeling like a loser because you can't keep it together, and it's just, and it's coming from a very deeply personal place. So I have a hard, I think, articulating it well. But it sure, it helps, but I think it's problematic.
I think you articulate it very well. Thank you so much for sharing your comments. Esme, I'm going to take your comment, and then I'm going to be the big bad facilitator and kind of force us to come to an uncomfortable conclusion to move on. But Esme, go for it.
Well, I want to follow up on what you were saying a little, Sharifa, because like the sense I get from your expression of your reservations is really that it's hard to trust, because a variable pricing strategy could be designed to exacerbate inequality, or it could be designed to promote equity, right? But like, it can be hard to trust that is it actually possible, given the world we live in, given the votes we have on council, for that policy to actually promote equity, as much as we would like to see a world in which it were so designed. And I wanted to just throw that out there as just a little echoing of what we've heard from you throughout this process. At the same time that it's like my passionate wish that we can get to a point where we have a variable pricing that does the opposite of what you fear, and that forces those who are comfortable and drive everywhere to contribute to a more just world. I hope that's an okay summary. I also just wanted to say, regarding evaluation, this city has a pattern of using evaluation to preserve the unjust systems that we have, and we're seeing it with what just happened to Portland Street Response. So I think that's where the desire to put some urgency in, that this use of evaluation is a practitioner's evaluation. It's an assessment. It's not, let's go study this for 5 years and see. I would hope that the language around evaluation is we do, we evaluate, we change, we move, we do, we evaluate, we change. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Esme. So to recap, I think what I've heard, and then I'm going to ask for kind of your permission via reaction emojis to kind of move us to our next discussion. And again, just a reminder, we don't all have to come to an agreement today. There's going to be a chance to vote next week or next month, but is adding a statement around evaluation should not delay implementation. And I think what I might add to that is something about a commitment to ongoing evaluation. Something about kind of considering the interrelation of these variables for what most advances climate and equity goals. And then I do wonder if we want to put some stronger language in here around ensuring an equitable outcome to address the theme of trust that I think Esme has really eloquently articulated. Is that summary, are people comfortable with that? And are we comfortable then with moving this forward? And I see Sarah's hand. Go for it, Sarah.
Sorry. I have concerns about saying that anything is going to ensure equitable outcomes, because does that mean that every single person, it's just, I wouldn't want to say ensure equitable outcomes, just as a, I don't know, I know too many lawyers, I guess.
I appreciate that perspective. All right, so in that case, then I think amending my summary to the an additional statement around evaluation, not delaying implementation, but a commitment to ongoing evaluation, and a statement about the interrelation. And I see Commissioner Hardesty's hand up. Go for it, Commissioner.
Just very quickly, I guess I share the concern. If we put a system in place, whatever it is, and we find out that it has inequitable outcomes, it's almost impossible to ever make it anything different other than a system that continues to provide inequitable outcomes. And I guess my question is, again, if I hear a sense of urgency from your members about implementation, but implementation without knowing how it's going to impact the most vulnerable people in the community is really an exercise that that is not one that I would want to participate in. And I would really start off putting a burden on the people who have options. And as you test that system, then you figure out if other folks should be added based on equity issues, income, geography, et cetera, But I think if there's a sense of urgency, it should be the people who have many options should be paying now while we figure out how or if low income community members who've been pushed out have that should also pay into the system. And if so, what does that look like? That's how you build an equitable system. You start with the people with the most options, and then you add other people slowly to ensure that they are not going to have inequitable outcomes. In my humble opinion, I know you invited me to listen, but this stuff is near and dear to my heart, as I said at the beginning, and it's really hard to undo inequity. And so if you tell me, let's start with those who have options, I would be 100% on board with that. With the language that you have here, there's too much wiggle room. And I got to tell you, people think equity is having the same for cats and dogs, right? Having the same kind of toys for cats and dogs, and that's not equity at all. And so I think we really have to be intentional and show people what equity looks like in practice. So I'll stop there, and I should probably leave because otherwise I'm going to keep interrupting. But I wanted to share that.
No, we so appreciate your comments and your perspective, Commissioner. And I'm catching up on the chat as well. Some recommendations coming in. We've got. I want to make sure I'm understanding Bao's suggestion of strike for equitable outcomes, and Monique is suggesting bias toward. Monique, would you mind coming off mute and just clarifying where we would put that language in?
Just a bias towards equitable outcomes. I feel like we are potentially digressing here and moving more towards the wordsmithing instead of really just trying to sign off on the things that we've talked about for so long. And yeah, there's been some really interesting points here, but yeah, my bias again is towards action, of course, with an equitable bend.
Is it okay if I jump in? I wonder, there is the other, the whole other section where we already have stronger language about, I'm trying to find out right a second. Oh yeah, providing, and right now it is discounts, rebates, and or exemptions. It's not 100% exemptions. I think that had more to do with, needing to find out a little bit more about what design of a program would work. But I wonder if, to speak to a few of the points, if making that section, if strengthening that to exemptions might, then we're sort of doing what Commissioner Hardis, you said, like we're starting with making sure that the people who can't pay are not. And I don't know what others think, but that because that's in a whole other section that isn't showing up here. But so we could strengthen that part as one way to address what's not in this area. I don't know if that is.
Bao, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I'll just quick comment. I looked on page 3. There's language of if the exemption. Sorry, yeah. So it's page 3, top paragraph. When exemptions are not possible, cash rebates or payments to low-income households is preferred, as it allows individuals to make the best transportation decisions for their personal situation. So I think this might, help partially address Sharifa's point. That's a concern regarding, low-income folks. Is they might not, benefit, enjoy some of the EV rebates, right? Because unless you have EV. So in lieu of that, so okay, how about we give them cash equivalent rebates, so they'll enjoy that even they don't have EV, they decide to take a bus or walk, a bike, or even drive. So just want to point it out. Thank you.
Okay, folks, I think we definitely started with the meatiest question, but it's good. I'm going to do a bit of a time check and to kind of, I think Monique put it really well. I think what the question really is, does anyone disagree that this is a summary of kind of where we're at in our discussion, in our 18-month discussion, with maybe some minor edits here that speak to evaluation the importance of evaluation, the importance of ongoing evaluation, also the importance of action. And then I guess I want to also get a reaction to Shoshana's suggestion of the strengthening the income protections bullet to be about prioritizing exemptions. Can I get some reaction emojis to indicate how we're feeling about this? Seeing some thumbs up. Okay.
I guess, or Monique's suggestion about bias towards equitable.
Yes, and so Monique, would that just be at the end of here, just with a bias towards equitable outcomes? She's giving me thumbs up. She's saying, yeah. And there will be a revised, we'll send a revised version, of course, at the end of all of this with new track changes so that you can see the changes. But, whew, okay. I'm not seeing more hands. I think we're going to keep moving. Thank you all so much.
I just want to flag there was a comment in the chat from Stephanie. Stephanie, you wrote a basic annual income for low income people as complementary along with strategy. Was that particularly for that section or complementary strategies in general?
Well, I thought maybe it could be added at the end. I noticed for that Fresno County, some people in Fresno County, movers and shakers, are considering guaranteeing annual income for the field workers. And I think that's brilliant. And it kind of cuts through the problem of trying to create a super complicated variable pricing structure. If people have money, then we can go on to the problem, the challenge of fixing the transportation system. That's all I'm thinking. That's the only problem with low income people. They don't have enough money. We've rigged the system against them, so they don't have enough money.
Mm-hmm. I'm seeing lots of head nods. So I think adding in some kind of statement around basic annual income.
Well, that's something the city can try to achieve. And
Tony's calling it a pre-bait. Shani, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I just feel like a lot of the things being said are things that have been said repeatedly in this group. Right. And I think that's like my disconnect is like none of the things that are saying, none of the things that people want to amend are things that haven't been said numerous times before. And so I guess like part of my frustration is like, why are we repeating the same things over and over and over again? Like, why do we have to re-edit this when the group has stated so many times over the past 18 months, these exact same sentiments, these exact same things, and then reading through things like this and then having these discussions repeatedly make me feel like we're not necessarily being heard in this space.
Thank you for saying that, Shani. And I hear you, and I apologize that it's not being reflected, and that's on us. And so that's really what tonight is about, is us, hearing this again. And I apologize, it has to be said again, but hearing, directly, and now we're all looking at the same words on the page. So let's really hone in on what needs to be added there and reflected there, so that it is a reflection of the discussion over the 18 months. But I hear you, and I apologize that it's not coming through. All right, so on that note, is there anything else that folks feel like has not been said, has not been documented in this discussion and needs to be mentioned for the record on this specific point? Okay, I'm going to move us to our next point for discussion. So this one is around a statement that appeared in the first draft that was around ensuring multimodal options exist before pricing is implemented. So we received a couple comments that were concerned that statement could prevent action by kind of setting an undefined bar before implementation could happen. And so that person suggested combining this kind of sentiment with the bullet that was further down around revenue reinvestment. So it was tying more clearly revenue reinvestment with that importance of having multimodal options. We also heard that if we say multimodal options should just exist, they are needed not just in an area where pricing might be applied, but that access to the priced area also matters. And that some of our pricing strategies that we've discussed could be applied citywide. So that leads to the SNAF note that we have here, which is that focusing only on multimodal options and reinvestment in a priced area can limit benefits, since supporting equitable mobility may require redistribution to other areas. For example, if you're pricing an area that has a lot of great multimodal options, e.g. the central city, you might need to redistribute some of that to other areas that have fewer options. So instead, we were wondering, and what you see here in the proposed edit, so that the focus should be on investments to improve access into the priced area. Is that kind of more inclusive and more in line with equitable mobility? So the latest proposed language you've got in front of you does move this bullet under the revenue bullet. And it says what you see here on the screen: pricing revenue should be reinvested to support multimodal access to areas where pricing is implemented and to mitigate potential negative impacts of traffic diversion. So the question on the table is, does anyone disagree with that, with moving this recommendation under the revenue bullet and focusing on multimodal access to priced areas? And you can use your emojis for thumbs up if you're feeling this is an edit you're okay with, and we can continue on to the next point. Okay, I'm not seeing hands pop up on this one. So I think we will move on. Oh, I see Sharifa's hand. Go for it, Sharifa.
So basically you're saying that it's, never mind, I'm a little confused. I'm one of the people that suggested that multimodal options should be available citywide, since drivers across the city may be impacted by certain.
Yes.
And so that was me. And so I guess I don't agree with that particular statement, that it should be just to mitigate exactly where pricing is being implemented. Or am I confused?
So I think what we have tried to do is to respond to your comment, because we agree that pricing revenue should be reinvested to support multimodal access to areas where pricing is implemented. So in that case, you might have pricing in somewhere like a central city or a business district, but that doesn't mean that the bus line out in East Portland that serves that area, that also needs investment, because even though it's not in the same area, it's all about access to these priced areas. So then in a situation where you might have a pricing that is a citywide thing, those reinvestments need to be made to improve citywide access.
Okay.
Does that help clarify?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Aaron, go for it.
And I don't want to, it is always so tempting to wordsmith, and I don't want to dive too wordsmithy into it, but I do think that there might be a need to distinguish between just having access to multimodal transportation and the quality of that multimodal transportation. And even just putting in the word like improve
Quality.
or quality, just because a bus gets there, if it takes you 2.5 hours on a bus to get to the area, is it really access? Is it really equitable? It's really not. And I think having an idea that the quality, the timeliness, the ability, the frequency, all those things, maybe just wrapped up in oh, perfect, 80, yeah, she's better with words. But something like that I think would be important.
Great, okay, so we've got 80's suggestion of frequent competitive multimodal access. I'm seeing nods. Okay. We'll take that note down. And keep moving to our next point of discussion. Love all the thank yous in the chat. All right, Shoshana, I think I hand it back over to you. We're moving into nearer term pricing recommendations.
All right, thank you. So I get the easier job again of just talking about the ones that we think were relatively easy to address. But some recommendations that we received in this section, one was to define near term. And so we have added a section at the beginning that says between 1 and 3 years, knowing 3 years is still not super near term, but it takes time to do these things. Again, we did hear some recommendations to make more actionable and focused on implementation. And again, knowing we need to balance that with doing it right, but made some suggestions there. There were some specific suggestions around detail and specificity to the parking cash out language, as well as the urban delivery recommendations. And we could pull those up if folks are interested, or if you're following along. The parking cash out there were just some examples of things going on in other places and sort of looking to them. And urban delivery was some suggestions to tie pricing of urban delivery to things like other curb management and just other strategies around urban delivery. There was a suggestion we had in a few places, sort of more words around further policy work needed and things like that. And actually folks thought there were some suggestions to remove some of that, because I think it's sort of redundant and assuming that of course we will have to continue doing some work on these things. And then the final suggestion in this section that we didn't think needed a ton of discussion was around moving the 2 recommendations that we had in the longer term strategy section, both around the tolling recommendations and around the recommendation for the city to sort of advocate for changes to the Oregon state constitutional restrictions, to move those from the longer term sections up to the nearer term sections. And so we have done that in this latest draft. So those, and then there's 4 areas we want to talk about. I'll hand it back to Emma, but are there any of those that people want to talk about more? Oh, it looks like Tony Jordan raised his hand.
Tony, go for it.
I sent a comment to Shoshana by email, I think, but I just wanted to, I was advised on, reminded that in a cash out seminar from DC, that maybe calling it flexible commuting benefits is a better way to phrase that. It's more, people don't know what parking cash out means, and flexible commuting benefits kind of tells you it's a better way to say it, really. I think so. I would suggest maybe we change that.
Add that language in. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just use that instead of parking cash out, because it's more descriptive.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Thank you. I saw that email this afternoon and didn't get a chance to incorporate it yet. Thank you.
Shani agrees. It's a comment from the chat.
Thank you, Shani and Mariana. Esme?
Oh, and this is just a little detail I wanted to add in about the constitutional restriction. And I really agree with moving up the urgency of it. And just as a historian in the room, I want to circle back around to that the history of the constitutional restriction is that it was passed by the 1979 legislature, and then was an initiative in the following year. It was part of the Reagan tax revolt of that time. And even though the financial impact was to remove state parks from the gas tax, the cultural environment was one of racist resentment of recipients of public money being spent on quote unquote the wrong people. And I think it's important to have that historical context in the room when we talk about contesting the constitutional restriction. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Esme. Okay, I'm going to walk us through these 4 things in green now for a little bit more discussion. So the first one is we heard from multiple task force members the idea of adding a little bit of language that suggests advancing these nearer term actions as a suite. And one of those people noted that there could be some concerns if you implement some of these, for example, charges on private for hire trips without prices on something like parking. So if you do them as a bundle, it could alleviate those concerns. So our one staff note here is that we'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I think this is a great thing for discussion. Our recommendation would be we still vote on each of these individual components one-on-one, because if we're going to say let's implement them as a package, we should have on the record how this group feels about each part of that package. But so you'll see the revised language there highlighted. It was just the addition of the to the extent possible, given the urgency of action, the city should advance these as a package to achieve maximum mobility and equity benefits. So our question on the table for you all is, does anyone disagree with adding that language? So if you agree, that's great. Feel free to emoji it up. But if you disagree, let us know and we can have a conversation. Seeing emojis. Not seeing hands. So I think that will gain us some time. We can move to the next discussion point. All right. Okay, so the next one is a task force. It's related to the recommendation around meter and permit parking districts. So this bullet, as a reminder, originally just started with something that said, reduce the time and complexity involved, yada, yada, yada. So someone suggested that we add a statement that really speaks to promoting the creation of new districts, to be clear that the group thinks overall the city should expand its parking meter and district areas, if you agree. So one quick staff note, which I believe we've shared in the past, is that PBOT is in the process of piloting a new process for creating districts to address some of these time and complexity concerns. So that doesn't change anything. I think a recommendation like this would likely point to that and bolster those efforts, but I just wanted to make sure everyone was aware of that context. So you'll see here the pieces in yellow are the kind of new things we've added based on the feedback. And the question on the table is, does anyone disagree with this revision? So if you agree, emoji it up. If you disagree, feel free to raise your hand and share your thoughts with us. All right, I see Aaron and then Commissioner Hardesty.
Yeah, I guess I don't know if we need to get more specific with that, especially if PBOT is already piloting something. But I mean, could we address like specifically, or at least more like why it is so difficult to change, and what are the sticking points? Like, can we help guide them a little bit more than just the general terms, or is that just a rabbit hole that we don't want to go down?
It's a great question, Aaron. We did get feedback on that as well. And so it's not highlighted here. I apologize for the kind of awkward format, but we added, the former version said the current system is unnecessarily complex and limits action. And we tried to say, it limits the ability to react to changing conditions and acute demand management needs. I think if we're really drilling into the details, it requires a 60% vote of property owners to approve any a new meter or a permit district. And so that is one of the pieces that the new sub bullet highlighted is I believe trying to address, and I welcome the person who suggested this to share their thoughts, but that the city should be making the final decision because parking takes up a lot of space in our right of way. Commissioner Hardesty, do you want to jump in there?
Yes, I was kind of surprised that you guys are promoting parking garages. Because what I'm hearing is that the goal is to make it easier for people to build parking garages.
No, so the recommendation here would be that it's easier for the city to price on-street parking in areas where on-street parking is currently free. So, I think some places where we're looking at this, maybe like Mississippi or on Division, where there's big parking demand, but also some pretty strong multimodal options. It's been difficult to add pricing in that area because it's a long process that requires 60% of property owner approval. And so one thing we heard from the discussion, and Monique is noting that there's actually multiple votes involved in addition to getting the 60%. So the recommendation that we heard from the group was that it should be easier for the city to add pricing to manage parking and discourage driving.
Got it. Thank you. That's a good clarification. Appreciate it.
Thank you for the question. Sharifa, go for it.
Yeah, I was just, and maybe I'm kind of getting lost trying to follow, like on my phone here, and is this a good place? Because that recent Metro study, how they talk about how many people are driving less than 2 miles, and in their off time when they're not commuting. So a lot of these are probably for pleasure or for shopping or whatever it is. And I feel like is that something, I mean, can that correlation be made between, because parking is another one of those things where you're engineering behavior. And I'm just wondering if this is a place to make a correlation between that study or if that already is somehow correlated here, because I think that's one thing I kind of came to the sort of conclusion after reading that study pretty carefully and realizing, because this is in the city of Portland's jurisdiction to do something with it. Whereas tolling, we're dealing with all sorts of stuff. So it's and for me personally, this has become kind of a meatier issue for me, because partly because I live in a very busy area and I see what's going on, and also I feel like it's a way to kind of target some of those wealthier drivers, or just force people, but not always. So that's not a blanket statement there, but it forces people to reevaluate how they approach a neighborhood.
Yeah, thanks for the comments, Sharifa. And maybe this is a good time to also mention the foundational statements and the principles. Our kind of assumption is that those apply throughout. Those are kind of the overarching statements that apply. So I think we thank you for raising the short trips point, and we have added that as a foundational statement. So I think that's where we've made this tie. And I think when we're thinking about the final report or the presentation to council, we can even pull that thread in stronger. And then the other thing to think about is those principles, all those things we talked about income exemptions and the importance of evaluating equity implications before action. All of that we're saying must apply to these recommendations. That's sort of the path we're trying to draw here. So given that, I would, and I'll let Commissioner Hardesty jump in there.
Give me, I think I'm gonna hang up because I just can't not respond to this stuff. I dream about this stuff at night. So let me, even this statement, I don't know that the city wants to manage parking demand. I think what we want to do is lessen the demand for parking spaces, especially in communities that have access to all their needs being met within a 20-minute walk of their home, right? So I guess just looking at this, just knowing that I don't want people coming to me saying, we'll pay because we can afford to have people park in front of my house, right? Right? I'd much rather be saying, look, we are creating communities where the auto isn't the only way to get there, right? So this one, I think people with resources, if they saw that language in print, Whoopi saying, the community wants you to make these decisions. We need parking. So come help us get more parking. And I don't want to have that conversation. So I just saying that I can see how, depending upon where you sit in this conversation, whether you see that as an opportunity for expanding the bad stuff, or whether you see it as an opportunity to really start investing in 20-minute neighborhoods, right? And so I'm a little challenged by that language too, and I couldn't figure out why it was just not sitting right, but I could just see some neighbors coming in. Yes, the community wants you to do this. Give us more parking.
I'm going to let our kind of resident parking expert, Tony Jordan, jump in here.
He's also my resident parking expert. I didn't realize that I had to share him.
The whole widely available parking expert here. So I guess I would say, Commissioner, clearly, I don't think anyone wants to create more parking garages, or at least I don't know many. I don't hang out with those people usually. The goal, there's two things here. One is where there's a lot of congestion for parking, trying to find a way to make it so that the people who do need to have access to that area by car have a place to park. And then another aspect of this, which is only adjacent to this committee, is like that one of the barriers to building abundant housing often is complaints about parking, and the park and building more parking into, requiring parking, which we don't require parking to be built in new apartment buildings, but still neighborhood pushback when you're building an apartment building and then you're like, people are going to be parking on my street in front of my house. It's much better to say, look, we're going to manage the on-street parking. So either the people who move into that apartment have to figure out what they're going to do with their car or rent a space. And also the people who already live there, if they're parking a boat, or if they have a boat in their driveway and so they park on the street, they have to make better choices about where to put their vehicles. And so I think it's not about trying to make it, more parking. It's and then a key piece too is that this connects to how we reinvest revenues from meter and permit districts. That, in my opinion, you always want to invest those things in order to reduce the demand. So you're charging, and then you're investing that money in ways that does provide more mobility options, that does make it in the right direction. So it's really a comprehensive system here. It's not about building additional parking garages.
So folks,
That's why we all use him, because he's just so darn good, right?
Brilliant.
Thank you for connecting those dots for me.
Thank you, Tony. So folks, what I think I'm hearing is, I haven't heard any major disagreement with this bullet, but that we might need to work on the language for some clarity. Now, I think even adding the city should create new priced parking per meter district, just so that it's clarifying. This isn't increasing the supply of parking. This is this is adding a demand management tool in these parking areas. And we'll work on adding a little bit of detail into the kind of why the current system isn't working. But is that an accurate assessment that we're good? We're good with including this addition? Seeing emojis. Love emojis. Okay, folks, I'm going to keep us moving to our next one. All right, so we received several recommendations or several suggestions to add language in this section just about our existing priced parking and whether the base rates need to increase. And one person, I bet you can't guess who, our parking expert, suggested that we maybe tie that specifically to performance-based parking. And another person suggested that we maybe move one of our longer term recommendations around dynamic parking up to this section. So just as a really quick refresher, when we say performance-based parking, the city adopted that back in 2018. It's a plan that will involve annual monitoring of our on-street parking and adjusting rates based on demand and occupancy goals. The performance-based parking plan, it's going to be implemented, and it was supposed to be implemented last year. But due to COVID, that data collection was delayed. So that's why it hasn't been implemented yet. Staff feel that performance-based parking would be a really important step towards a more dynamic system because it will involve setting rates based on demand on that annual basis. Getting to the point where that could happen in a more real-time fashion is going to take some time from a data collection, a technology, and an administration perspective. So because of that, we've left the truly dynamic one in the long-term section, and we're going to talk about that in a second, so don't worry. But we think that the performance-based parking thing might address the person who said, let's move this up. So given all of that, you see some proposed language on the screen. This is a brand new recommendation, but it is related to something we've talked about in the past. And so the proposal is accelerate implementation of the performance-based parking management policy to assess where parking pricing should be immediately increased and establish a structure for regular evaluation and increase to market rates. We also have a bit of a sub-bullet there that talks about the situation we're in right now with parking demand in the central city and rebound, the expected rebound to pre-pandemic levels. So our question to you all is, does anyone disagree with adding this recommendation? And so I'm also going to catch up on the chat where I'm sure Tony's 5 steps ahead of me.
Go ahead.
So Tony is suggesting that rather than saying immediately increased, you swap in immediately adjusted.
Okay.
And there's some
great.
initial consensus from folks chiming in there in the
Because
chat.
rates might go down rather than up. Okay, yep. All right. So the question on the table, folks, is, does anyone disagree with adding this recommendation in? Okay. Slowly turning my notebook page over to see if any hands pop up, but I'm not seeing any. And we asked about the definition of immediately, and some folks have said, Aaron's suggesting as soon as possible. How do folks feel about that? If we said where parking prices should be adjusted as soon as possible and establish a structure for regular evaluation. Val, go for it.
So I do have a quick question, what's the cadence for review the rates, right? Because if we just say as soon as possible, that could be next year or it could be next quarter. So I think if we kind of, if possible, maybe you already have the language, is that quarterly at least review or biannually. So I think at least a minimum cadence for, review the rate if it still makes sense or too high, too low. I agree with Tony's points, should be changed, adjusted.
So I'm seeing agreement from Shani and Tony. Tony did at one point suggest, the existing is annual. We could add in language to it should happen more than annually. One kind of note, we followed up with our parking folks on this. The reason for the annual right now is sort of based on some best practice research and sort of you want to leave a new price in long enough to gather data on how it's working. And so it's, having it change every week isn't enough time to see the effect, but we could add language about more frequently than annual. Does that address that kind of, what does immediately mean? What does as soon as possible mean?
Sounds good, thank you, yeah.
And Commissioner, I see your comment in the chat there, can't be changed outside of the contract. Can you elaborate, or could my parking expert friend Tony also help?
Sure. It's just that we actually sign contracts with folks to do the jobs that actually park automobiles and process people in and out of the city parking garages. And the second piece, because I don't type as fast as you guys, I was about to, is say that downtown parking has traditionally been underinflated because they want to incentivize people coming downtown. So I suspect that the Portland Business Alliance will come out in force against your recommendation, just because that, for the 30 plus years I've lived here, that's been why the city parking garages have existed. So I'm not saying don't recommend it. I just think that this is not a short-term goal. If this is on your immediate list, it's going to take a little while.
Thank you,
And so,
Commissioner.
yeah, we can't do it when until the next contract comes up. But I think what we could do is recommend that in the very next contract that we put in annual increases based on inflation, CBI, or whatever we want to use as the automatic increase.
Commissioner, thank you, Commissioner. I see Tony's hand up, and I think Shoshana, you also might want to jump in there. Am I reading your face right?
Well, we can let Tony go first.
So the one thing about this is when the policy itself was passed, as it says 2018, and it calls, there was no, one of the on that committee, one of the things was there was no, everything was set at $2, and we know that some areas might need like $4 pricing to actually create the available, to have an impact on the pricing. Like think of like down in the like areas where a lot of restaurants are, and so it would take, at an annual increase of up to 60 cents, it was going to take like 5 years to reach a price for parking where like something might have an impact in these areas, on certain blocks of downtown where very high parking rates are. And so part of this is just like, it's all on street, trying to get to the on street, raising, getting there faster rather than, like taking 5 years to reach a price that actually meets the goal. The goal is to create an open space, some less congestion for the on-street parking so people can find places where they want to. And so that's where this is kind of like, it's just trying to, the policy's already passed. PBA was on that committee that passed the 2018 policy. It's kind of just like, let's get it into where it's actually doing its job quicker is the goal of my recommendation, why I asked for the study editor.
Rather than that incremental approach. So it's really that accelerate the implementation of a policy that already has been adopted by council and had a public process.
And it's still incremental. It's just like, maybe we recognize 3 years have got like,
so this is parking meter revenue only.
Yeah, I mean, there is a policy that says the garages are supposed to be cheaper than the on-street because you want people to use them instead. But then this is to push
people into the garages, right?
This is to raise and lower. I mean, because there's also areas of downtown where it costs $2 to park. I mean, all pandemic, it cost $2 to park, and it should have been $1 or less because no one was there, right? So like, it goes in both directions. You're trying to just find the right price.
Got it.
Okay, folks, so I think the two recommendations on the table would be to change increase to adjusted, because what Tony just said, prices could go down, and then just get a little bit clearer about immediately and, adding in that additional detail of more frequently than once a year. But still the thrust here is implement the policy you've got on the books as soon as possible. Okay, seeing nods, seeing emojis, seeing probably a desire to keep moving. This time goes fast, but this is really great. And I appreciate you guys hanging in there with us. We are making good progress. I'm going to move us to the next one. This is the last one for this near-term section. So within the urban delivery and private for hire sections, we heard some concern about the original sub-bullets in those sections. The task force member we heard from stated that it's not the city's responsibility to accommodate private commercial services, which are having a significant impact on our street. And that person also raised that the quality of these gig economy jobs can be very poor. And we agree, and those concerns around the impacts of these trips are really precisely why we brought this question to the task force about whether pricing these trips makes sense, pricing these services. And so we feel that we've heard from the group kind of three things. A, yes, pricing these trips to manage demand and impacts is promising, but we've also, we think, heard, and we went back to the notes, we think we heard that we need to recognize that these services do meet needs for many community members. And we've heard a lot about the quality of the jobs and the importance of ensuring positive workforce conditions, which is something articulated in our equitable mobility framework. So to respond to this really good feedback, we've kind of beefed up these bullets a little bit to try to be more specific and say that the proposals for fees on these services should recognize the ways they do meet needs for people who have limited options, and that they should be designed explicitly to help improve conditions for these workforce. So what our question is for you is, does anyone disagree with keeping the sub-bullets with the revisions that we've proposed here? So it's really, these are clarification edits. I think clarification and more specificity edits. Seeing them thumbs up emojis. Sarah, I see your hand up. Go for it.
I'm just, it basically ringing the same bells I did before. I'm concerned about this be designed to help improve conditions for their workforce. I don't really know how you design a demand management or sort of a transportation. Like I just don't know what that looks like. And I don't want to hold any positive changes hostage to standards that we don't hold the status quo to. And so I just have some concerns about it. I think it's good and it's a good idea. I'm just worried about it confining the possibility for action.
Thanks, Sarah. Do others have thoughts on that point?
You know, Sarah, maybe if I can, the urban delivery one, and we were sort of trying to take all the feedback, and so this changed a little bit, but I'm not sure for urban delivery. For private for hire, I know, and again, we do have to think about the details more, but there have been some places I think that have been thinking about a charge that, you know, we're talking largely about TNCs, Uber and Lyft, and they spend some time driving without passengers to go pick up passengers. And if you were to design a fee that is, maybe not gonna be able to describe this perfectly right now, but you know, where you're charging differently based on the time when they don't have a passenger and when they do, then there are ways that you're actually helping people who are driving get paid more, because there's a disincentive to be driving without the passenger times. And I'm not describing this very well right this second, but I think that, you know, there are potentially ways to use a fee that both helps reduce driving miles and is good for climate and may actually be beneficial for the workforce. So that was sort of the intention of acknowledging the importance of these as jobs, and that if we're gonna, you know, use a fee to change it, can we try to hit multiple objectives? But not that it will necessarily be easy.
I see Sharifa and Aaron's hands up. I also am so grateful for Sharifa and Aaron for commenting, and want to do my good facilitator job that if others who haven't spoken tonight also want to provide some verbal comments, please feel free, and also feel free to use the chat. But I will go to Sharifa and then go to Aaron.
Oh, I do agree with Sarah with that sort of, I not agree, but I understand necessarily what she means, that sort of not wanting to say something without really knowing what it looks like. And I think there's the fact of the matter is that we really actually didn't discuss this really in depth in this last 18 months, unfortunately. I think for me, this is one place where I do feel real strong sense of urgency, because this is undermining what the city wants to do in general, the TNCs and the delivery and stuff like that. And also it's just growing, and it's growing so fast. So I feel a sense of urgency with implementing fees and discussing it further, addressing concerns that's like what Sarah has, and really kind of the city need to get firm about this and really make the statements it wants to make, and do it soon, because this is rapidly altering the landscape and the cityscape and the community. That's all I've got to say. So I guess language urgency would be nice.
Aaron, go for it.
And I'll be quick. Yeah, I do remember having like that when we got onto the subject, talking about it a little bit, and one of the fears we had was that these large companies, Uber and et cetera, if fees were imposed, those fees would be passed on to the delivery drivers, those who can least afford it, those who already have been denied unionization or denied any type of like they're contract workers. They don't really have any protection whatsoever as of right now. And we feared that any fees that would go on would squeeze out the people that were not intended to be squeezed. And so I think that to me is how I read the spirit of this, is that the fee should be directed either at the end user who is willing to pay more in order to get the service that they need, or to the big companies that are trying to make a lot of money off of this service, but not necessarily to these independent contractors who are hustling to be, to put it lightly, on how to make ends meet. So I think that was kind of the spirit that I read this.
Thank you, Aaron. Commissioner Hardesty, I see your hand up.
Just to back up Aaron, the moment we said at City Hall, wait a minute, you can't actually charge people who can't go to a restaurant a bucket load of money so that you would deliver food to their house. And what do? They just pass the charge on to the customer. There is no way that the city of Portland can monitor the payroll of private companies that have a active business license in the city. So I don't think that I don't believe that these recommendations are realistic. And I just want to say that today, because I heard somebody say, let's do it now. We do not control how private businesses operate. If they're operating legally within the law, the city cannot dictate behavior. We'd like to sometimes, but we can't.
I might, thank you, Commissioner. And I want to also reflect that there's good suggestions coming in from the chat that I'm capturing. Things like Aaron's point about directing fees to end users, feedback about making sure we're defining who we're talking about here, something about maybe not saying improve conditions, but something about, asserting something in the recommendations about the problematic labor dynamics here. But on the commissioner's point, I did want to invite, Shoshana or Eric from our staff team to just share any thoughts on specifically the feasibility of these recommendations, anything that's come up from the staff research perspective.
Well, I think what is maybe hard here is we're showing these sub bullets under the base recommendation, which is about, could there be something like, with private hire, could there be something like we already have a 50 cent fee that is more just sort of administering the program, but could you charge more, say downtown during peak hours or something like that? And then, what we're talking about here is, as we design the fee, can we just sort of make sure that there are some other things involved? Right. Of course, there's questions of, can we design it so that it is impacting workforce in certain ways? There are all sorts of things we cannot do. I think there are different policy levers, though, that you can use with a particular fee that we have been, lightly exploring for a while. Urban delivery is much harder. There is, as you said, there is nothing in the books right now, but there has been some research, and we've been following other places that are also thinking about what are ways that we can look to disincentivize, everyone sending themselves packages all the time, one by one, essentially. And the reason this language actually in the proposal was develop a proposal. Again, not what we're looking at, but the base recommendation here was develop proposals, because we know we're pretty far away from a proposal. We heard from task force members, from a few people, that we should move faster on this one. I think, there is work to be done on what is actually possible. So we really are at the stage of developing more of a proposal. We know that they're adding a lot of driving miles in our city, and it's trying to combat that. But to your point, there's a lot we have to figure out still to do these effectively.
All right, folks. I'm gonna be big bad facilitator again, and just kind of see if we're, with emojis, if we're comfortable moving on from this one, keeping these bullets in there, but working on the language so that we're adding maybe something around when we explaining what the improved conditions mean and avoiding that language, but talking a little bit about a statement of about the labor dynamics that are problematic, and some more specificity about the ways that a fee could be designed to protect the workforce. Seeing some quizzical faces, but also some thumbs up, and I think also some tired faces, which I completely understand. We're getting close. With your permission, I'll move us forward to our last section. I wonder, Shoshana, if you could just do this super fast, the recap of what has been incorporated.
Yes, super quickly, in the long-term area, we received some language to some recommendations to strengthen language around statewide advocacy for the road user charge or the vehicle miles traveled charged. And acknowledging, a simple one, acknowledging unknown long-term impacts of COVID-19 on Central City and the Central City travel patterns. And then this one I actually already mentioned in the long-term section. We received a recommendation to move up the constitutional restriction issue and the tolling recommendations to the nearer term areas. So but I think we can move on from those pretty quickly.
Thank you. Okay, so the 2 points we want to discuss in this section. Our first, we had a task force member express some concern about dynamic parking pricing and whether these systems disproportionately benefit wealthier drivers who are less price sensitive. We did kind of already talk about this as a reminder up in the principles section, and kind of variability and the need to evaluate variability. Looking back through our discussions and our polls, quote unquote polls that we've taken to date, this idea of moving towards a more dynamic and demand-based parking system consistently ranked pretty highly with this group. And as we've already discussed, we also heard the perspective that dynamic prices may provide more choices for people who don't want to pay. And especially if, I think it's a very poorly quote Esme, I think it's all about how you design variability. And that's really, really critical. So we've proposed in the latest draft, adding a clause at the top of this section that just really reiterates that these show promise if they are developed in accordance with those overarching principles. So if those apply with things like low-income exemptions, the question is, does anyone disagree with leaving this recommendation on the list for a final vote in July? So tonight, I don't think is the time to say who agrees, who doesn't agree, but are we comfortable leaving this on the list to vote next month? And I see Stephanie's hand is up. And maybe she didn't need to put her hand up.
I'm sorry, I meant to thumbs up and I chose the emoji.
Great.
Sorry.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie. And big thanks to our commissioner, who I believe may have just hung up, but thank you so much, Commissioner, for being here. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands come up of people who disagree with leaving this one on for a vote. So with that, I'm going to move us forward. Still going to try to get you out of here as close as we can. All right, the next one's final one for this section. One task force member suggested removing the bullet on cordons because some of the modeling we reviewed showed that it didn't have as much potential to improve equitable mobility as other things. We did look back at the notes from this meeting and we looked at the poll, and the poll that we took then had 72% of folks said that they thought it showed some promise, but they weren't sure. And we also discussed the caveats of the modeling that we reviewed, including how neither the Metro study nor the sandbox was able to look at things like combinations of strategies and how you might design a cordon or do a cordon with something else to improve the outcomes. So given all of that, we as staff have recommended keeping the bullet as is. And you'll see here the bullet tries to be very clear that it was not recommended as highly by the task force. And it's really about continue exploring to see if it shows promise. And then finally, as the sub bullets in this section express, which I don't have on the page, but you can see it in the PDF, we did add, some language around the central city has the most plentiful multimodal options. It's also pre-COVID was very congested, but we need to ensure that we're studying the longer term impacts of COVID, and more modeling is definitely necessary. So the question here, kind of like the last one, does anyone disagree with leaving this on the list for a final vote next month? See thumbs up from several folks. Okay. I see Shawnee's hand up and thumbs up. So Shawnee, do you have a comment to make?
Yeah, it's like a twofer.
Sure.
It's like a yes and. Would it be possible to somehow amend the language to include that there were so many caveats and limits to the modeling analysis? Like, I feel like that's the part that isn't like, it's like, it wasn't recommended as highly, but I feel like we really need to address specifically why it was not recommended, and that 72% is a false number if those caveats are included. Like, if it isn't like it expressly stated, like, this is why people were concerned about this, it was the trepidation, this is why we felt it was worth exploring further, but these are the reasons why we felt like it was extremely inequitable and very problematic. Because I feel like that was the kind of in the conversations that I was in, I felt very much like that was the conclusions that we came to. Was like, there was never, even with that 72%, there was never a like, yes, we want to explore this. It was a okay, but also.
Yep, I totally hear you, and I saw lots of nods and thumbs up as you were talking. So I think we will take a stab at adding in the why this was not as recommended as highly, really explaining kind of more of the commentary that accompanied this along with the recommendation. Great. Thank you so much. Okay, folks, I'm going to acknowledge that it's 8. I'm also going to acknowledge that we have one more comment to talk about. Shoshana is going to summarize the complementary strategies bit, and then we've just got our last section. Because of that, and it's the only time I think we've asked you to do this in this whole process, if you're comfortable staying on for 10 more minutes, I think we can wrap this up. But I'm so sorry. I love to get you out of here right at 8. If you want to go get food and bring it back, that's fine. Seeing thumbs up, thank you so much for your permission to keep you just a little bit longer. Shoshana, do you want to do this quick recap?
Sure. Okay, really quickly, there were no suggestions in this section that we think we need to dive deep on. One was a suggestion to add safety investments, or specifically as complementary strategies. And the rest of these, I think we have already covered in other areas. Expand description of connected communities to be connected, inclusive, and complete. Recognize driving access as another inequity, and avoid it conflating transit-oriented development and affordable housing, be more specific about affordable housing. So yes, there was nothing there. And
I'm just pausing for a brief second if anyone thinks those are fatal flaws, but I think we've covered most of them. So we will move on to the final section.
So here, again, most of the, we had a hand raised.
Sharifa, go for it.
I don't like the word complete. I feel like that's it's not up for us or the city to decide whether a neighborhood or a community is complete or not. Does that make any sense? There's just something about that word. The other two I'm fine with. It's just that one kind of, and I think I just take it personally because my neighborhood's been changed so much by zoning and things like that, because people thought it wasn't complete before, and it was. So I think I don't like that word. That's it.
Thanks, Sharifa. I think the person or the people who recommended it were we're bringing up that our planning folks at the city, there's a whole concept of complete communities in our, I think, comprehensive plan. But I think what we can do, because I hear your concern, I think we could look at how they define complete community and use that definition rather than the word complete, which could have other connotations. So I think it is about having access to the services that you need to live your life within a 20-minute. We could look up the exact definition. Would that address your concerns, and are others comfortable with that approach?
Yeah, I mean, you don't need to get all crazy, but just that word just looked me the wrong way.
Yeah. Stephanie, go for it.
Just real fast, Sharifa, the term connected community has to do with electrical infrastructure. The term complete neighborhood is something that's been used by the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability for a long time. So it's just a matter of word labels that make things more understandable to people like the city council members who are familiar with the reports from the different bureaus.
Thanks, Stephanie. We'll go back and we'll make sure that we're not using jargon without defining said jargon, which I think is always something that you've got to hold bureaucrats accountable for. We love it. We love the jargon. All right, Shoshana, last section summary.
Okay, so this section was previously called something wonky because we like it, as you said, and we had a suggestion to make it a little simpler, so it's now, we changed it to implementation next steps. Again, there was a note here about emphasizing the need for bold leadership, adding references specifically to partnering with local institutions and agencies around data collection and research, which we had already noted was important. And also related to data, noting the importance of data in supporting potential controversial policy positions. So data being really key. Here, related to words, there was also a suggestion to do a better job of defining community, and we had something about meeting people where they are, and provide some more specific language about accessible outreach, and just trying to define that better. And then we had a request to remove the statement about the unpopularity of pricing until after it's implemented. So we have struck that. So those were the changes in that section.
Any fatal flaws in those orange edits that we've incorporated? Okay, so we're going to talk about the last one, which was a brand new addition offered by a task force member. This was about exploring models for a unified credit or rebate system for low-income households that could be applied across pricing programs to reduce burdens on these households and administrative complexity. And I believe the thrust here was if you had a different discount system or a different exemption or a different rebate across everything, it both burdens individuals who have to then apply for all that, understand all that, figure it out, and it just creates a lot more work on the administrative side. So if we created a unified credit or rebate system, that could have multiple benefits. I think this is a little bit related to some of the things we talked about at the very top of the meeting about universal basic income, about prioritizing exemptions. But I do want to ask if anyone disagrees with adding this recommendation to this implementation section. And it is about exploring models. So it's kind of a process statement, but I welcome any comments or concerns.
Emma, I wonder, and I guess I'm not sure where if the other language was getting stronger about exemptions rather than rebates or discounts, I wonder how that changes this.
It's a great question. I welcome others' thoughts about that. I'm going to go to Sharifa's comment.
I don't really have a comment. I think it's more, I'm thinking about what Commissioner Hardesty said earlier about rebates being left on the table often. Would this also include like TriMet? Is this just like all the road, parking, TriMet, everything together, or what? I guess I'm a little confused.
Sure. And if it's okay for me to say this, I believe this came from Tony. So Tony, I might welcome you to jump in here, but this is also the delicate dance of it's probably intentionally high level because we haven't had a chance to talk about this and we can't get into every detail right now. But I think, Sharifa, the spirit of, yes, we don't need to have people having a different system with every single agency that runs our transportation system is something that I think I've heard from this group. And so I think that would be the intent behind this. But Tony, jump in there.
Part of this came about, I was having a discussion with another committee member about like trying to find ways to make that process simpler. And one of the ideas was like, this could even be something that is if cash, like, because like a cash rebate or prebate or however you do it, because that would address some of Commissioner Hardesty's concerns, like if you're actually giving the people the money ahead of time. If that's too difficult, one option could be something that people can use to pay whatever any sort of city charges they have. So like maybe they're using it to pay their water bill or any other fee that they might have in doing with the city. But really, yeah, we're dealing with multiple programs that each would have certain exemptions built into them. And I've seen this over and over on other committees I'm on. It seems like every new thing is tasked with the burden of implementing something separately. And it just feels like it doesn't just slow things down, it stops things and it really hinders the ability of these programs to do what they're supposed to do. So like trying to just figure a way to do this once would be, I think, easier and more effective.
Bao, do you want to jump in there?
Oh, actually, just Tony said that in last sentence. Yeah, I was thinking, this concern, basically, yeah, if we can link that to existing already, those, whatever, this tester eligibility program, then basically, one program rule them all. And also consider cash rebates. I think we're talking about in a smaller group before, is that let people decide what they want to spend their, monies on, what transportation option they want to pursue for low-income household. Thank you.
Thank you. So just to kind of capture, I think what I've heard from Shoshana and then Tony and Bao's comment is if we maybe change this from saying rebate, but maybe made it more a unified exemption and financial support system for low-income households, and we kind of broadened it out a little bit. So it's really more about that kind of a wallet kind of model that someone can use for multiple things. I wonder if that is kind of starting to address this. And Sharifa, jump in there.
Oh no, I was just going to say that I do appreciate the sentiment behind this, and I think it is important. I mean, the exact language, I'm not sure if I'm going to get nitty gritty about it, but I think this is something important for the city to look at. If they're going to get serious about charging people for this and that, stuff like that. And I think it's cool to make this kind of recommendation, is all I'm saying.
Thank you. Okay, folks, I see no other hands up. So I'm going to ask one last emoji sort of vote thing of, are we comfortable with, we'll work on the language and get you in a new draft, but with keeping this on the list. And thank you to Tony for suggesting it. Seeing thumbs up, seeing celebration emojis. Oh man, okay. Who's tired? I'm tired, but I'm also really grateful. Thank you so much for that discussion. I know that was a lot. It was not enough, but it was really, really helpful from our perspective. I'm going to hand it over to Shoshana to do just a couple last words.
All right, we can make this super quick because I think we said a lot of this already. But we will take what we heard tonight and do another round of edits and send it back out to you all again. And then we will go through one last time on July 12th and we'll vote. And it seems like it still, I think, makes sense to vote in sections, but probably one by one on the nearer term and longer term recommendations. And again, we will be recording minority opinions so that hopefully we can I'm tired to collect everyone's thoughts.
And just on that point, Shoshana, I just want to go back to Shawnee's comment from the beginning and say, you know, it is always our mission and our goal to accurately capture the discussion that's here. So, you know, in the intervening weeks, let's be in touch. Let's talk about how we can make sure this is reflecting your feedback. But then also, there's going to be a point here where we're taking some votes, and I expect there's probably going to be some points of disagreement. But we are really committed to recording those minority opinions. We'll follow up with more information on exactly how that process will go. But I do want to encourage folks to know that your voice will be heard and will be documented in this process. So it's not, if your vote doesn't go with the majority of the group, that's it. We absolutely will reflect that. That's a commitment in our charter.
Yes, definitely. Thank you, Emma. And then I think, again, we really said all this. Next week's the final vote, and hopefully we can get through it and have a little bit of time to thank you all again and have some celebration. And then we will think a little bit about next steps. And again, we'll watch your inboxes. We'll be sending out some more things. And even though we're 10 minutes late, if you have a minute to do the survey, we always want to hear your feedback. So just thank you. This was a long meeting, and we really appreciate you hanging with us through this process. And again, hopefully we are able to really capture, or we are committed to really capturing everyone's feedback as we wrap this up. So thank you all so much.
Have a great evening, everyone. See you in July.
Thank you, everyone.